Can you add ink to a watercolor painting that you've already done? The answer is yes, and I'm going to give you some examples of how to do that. Hi, this is Stevie. I have a couple of paintings that I did, little sketches, that I thought could benefit by adding some more detail to them. And I decided to use ink. And I have these pens that I bought, I think I might have bought them at Walgreens or Walmart. They're easy to find, and they're made by Zebra pens. And what I like about them is it's permanent ink, so that you don't have to worry about them smearing if you get water on them. And they come in really vibrant colors. I've had these for a long time, but I haven't used them that much. But I got them out because I wanted to try them on a couple of these sketches. This was a very loose sketch of some daffodils that I did. I think I was demonstrating how to make loose grasses. But I thought that the flowers could benefit from a little more work because there's not a lot of contrast because of the yellow color, and it would make them stand out a little bit better if they had some ink on them. So I decided to try the orange pen from that set that I just showed you. And when you do this, always test it on another piece of paper first. And I just had an old practice piece that I was putting it on just to test the color to make sure the color was okay. And it matched pretty well, so I went ahead and used that. So I'm going to pick out some of the daffodils more in the center of the painting, not out of the edges, to where I think the shapes could use some help, or I think that they're just a good, really good shape to put more ink on and to draw out the petals. So I'm just kind of going around picking out different flowers to ink and fixing up those centers a little bit too. I think most people figured out they were daffodils, but they could use a little bit of work. I did it really fast. And so well, on the flowers that I picked out, I went around the centers as well, uh, in addition to adding the outside petals. And I think the orange looks pretty good. I could have used black, but I just had these pens and wanted to try them, and I'm really happy with that. The black would have been nice, but it would have maybe been a little overwhelming because the color here was so light. So I like the orange, and I'm glad I did that. And can you see how I just skip around? I don't pick out every single one. I try to balance it out, but I don't want to get out toward the edges where I don't want a lot of detail. But just picking out those flowers that I thought would work best for doing this. And I think it gives a lot more life to that little painting. The grass I'm not worried about because when I did that painting, I got lots of dark color in the grass, so that stands out pretty well. And it's okay to do that. You can do ink in part of your painting and not in other parts. So I think that helped a lot for that little sketch. And I did one other thing, I don't know if you could see it. I had penciled in the word daffodils. I just thought that maybe the top of the paper could use something. So I just drew in cursive handwriting the word daffodils. And I erased most of that with my kneaded eraser because the pencil will really show through with yellow. And I knew I wanted to use some of my colored pens for that. I was testing out two different kinds of pens that I have. These are the Zig pens. Zig is made by Kuretake, I think. Anyway, they have a bolder tip and then a fine tip. Each end has a tip on it. And I was just testing those, and those look pretty good. The other pens, they're called Click Art, I think, and I don't know much about those pens, but they're not, you can't see it as well, so I'm going to stick with the Zig pens to do this lettering. The only caution about this with Zig pens is that the ink is water soluble. So if you drop water on it, it's going to bleed, just so you know that. So I always do that last when I'm doing a sketch. And you can see I really didn't center it very well, the word daffodils. So I added a little flare there at the end, just to help spread it out and get it more evenly distributed across the page. I did that in the yellow ink, and then I took the orange ink, that's the Zig pen again, the orange one, on the fine tip and made a little shadow on the right and on the bottom of each of the letters. And that helps to make it more visible since that yellow color was hard to see. So the addition of the orange makes it very readable. And the first rule in any calligraphy or lettering that you do should be that it has to be readable. So don't pick fonts that are hard to read. For example, you will never see me use a Gothic font because Gothic is very difficult to read. But this shadowing of the letters really helps. And notice how when I make that flare at the end, I was pulling the pen rather than pushing it. And it's just easier to manipulate it that way for those long strokes. And I was just making some little flowery things on the end. Nothing real special there. Just something to fill up that space, really. So there I have a cute little sketch out of that, and I think the ink really enhanced it along with the lettering. And you don't have to put lettering in. It just happens that I love lettering. I always have, and I add it to a lot of my sketches. There I decided to use that zig pen to put some more color in the centers of those daffodils. Now here's another little sketch that I did, and actually I did a video on this. It was painting a bird without drawing it first, so there's no pencil on there at all. And I like how it turned out, but I thought the bird could use a little more definition with some ink. And rather than using a black pen, I had a beautiful purple color in that set of pens, so I decided to use the purple, and I like how this came out. Again, it's not quite as harsh as a black pen would be, and I just really like the purple color too. And I try to place it around the bird where I can make it look like feathers, or sometimes to enhance the lighter colors. Up on his face, I put more the purple color right up against that white spot on his cheek, and that helps to bring that white forward. A little more on his tail. I didn't do a good job on the tail because he's a grackle, and grackles have really long tails, and I ran out of space. But anyway, so I just added little bits here and there. I thought that the front of him, his chest area needed a little something more, and I think the ink really helped there. And on his head, I added a little more, but I kept that lost edge toward the back of his head. I really like that, so I didn't touch that. And then I put a little bit on his legs and feet, on what would be the shadow side of them. And I think that really helped that little bird. I think he looks very cute now. And that just was a quick exercise. It just took me 2 or 3 minutes to do that. Now this one, I've done this painting before. I think I did a video on it. I was practicing just painting without drawing. So I threw a little water on my paper and just painted with the brush. I painted those 3 peppers, those colorful peppers. But they needed a lot more definition, so I thought this might be a good thing to show you. I pulled out the orange pen and the red pen, and rather than just my black micron pen, and I'm just defining the shapes a little bit more with those pens. And what I like about it is it still gives it a very loose look. And I got that loose look by throwing some water on the paper before I started. Just randomly flicking some water on the paper. And then the color, I want the color deliberately to bleed. And that's what that does. And that's what gives it that loose effect. But now I'm just really defining the shapes, not worrying about the color that's bleeding, but just defining the shape of each pepper. And so it makes it much more obvious what it is. And I hadn't finished the painting. I didn't add the stems, so I'm doing that with that green pen. And I'll have to go back in with some watercolor to add those stems too, because this green pen is not dark enough. And I want it to look consistent with the rest of the painting. But I'm just using the pen to draw the shapes here. And then there was another little stem showing on that one behind. And one thing I should mention is when you paint objects like this, paint the front object first. And you can see why, because, for example, I painted the red one first because the yellow one behind it is part of it is hidden. so you don't want them running into each other. So always paint your forward object first. And the same goes for sketching as well, sketching with ink. So now I'm going back to my watercolor, and I'm going to mix up a little bit of a green color. First, I'm using, I know my palette's kind of out of the picture, but that is my green gold. It's a light green, and I decided to put that on first because I like to mix different kinds of green. And then I mixed up a little bit of sap green with some cobalt blue to get a darker shade of green. And I'm using that for the darker color on the stems, applying it in the areas that would be naturally darker or in shadow. So just getting that on each one. On that pepper on the left, on that yellow pepper on the left, I drew the bottom part of the stem with that as well, and I'm going to have to go back and darken that up some more. It doesn't look dark enough to me. So I got the stems in, and these are really quick little paintings to do, and they're very cute. There, I went back in with more of the mix of sap green and cobalt blue to darken up the base of that stem a little bit to give it more dimension, make it look like it's sitting down in the pepper the way it should be. And there I'm just flicking a little water on the surface of the paper because I wanted to add a little more color, especially to the red. I had used, I think, a mix of probably some of my carmine and cadmium red light. And cad red light has a tendency to really lighten up when it dries. So I usually when I use that color, I have to go back in and add more of it to get a darker value. And I added a little bit of transparent orange in there too. I really like to vary the colors, and I just think it enhances it a lot to do that. Notice how I left some areas white too, just to indicate some highlights on the peppers. That image up at the top on my board, that's kind of a postcard of a previous painting I had done like that. I was using that as my reference. And here I was just fixing that shape a little bit. I really liked the bloom on that pepper, but I ended up having to cover it up because I needed to fix that shape a little bit with a little more color. It didn't have enough color. So just going around fixing that. Anywhere where I think there's weak color or it just needs a little more, I'm adding that in, and I'm purposely bleeding that color out. Notice how I do that. I drop some drops of water on the paper and then let the color bleed out. And when I get the shadows in, it looks really nice. And it looks like reflective color. That's why I do that. So now I think maybe I am at the point where I want to put some shadows in, just cleaning my palette. And sorry it's out of the picture. I can't always see what I'm doing in the camera, so sometimes it ends up that you can't see everything. So now I want to mix up a color that I want to use for shadow, and although I really like to use colors that I already have in the painting, it's not always possible. So I'm using manganese blue. That's the blue I'm using. And I want to show you what happens if I mix some cad red light with it. It gives me a gray, but it's kind of a dull looking gray. And I did that because I already have cad red light in the painting, and it would make it look really cohesive. But I don't like that gray. So instead I'm mixing the manganese blue with my permanent rose, a little bit of permanent rose, and that makes a really nice purplish gray color. Manganese has a lot of green in it, so that's why it makes it purplish gray. But then I go back and I actually add a little bit of green to it. I just take a dab of my sap green, not much, just a little bit of the sap green, which grays it down. So I just don't want it to be too purple. And I'll use that as my shadow color. And one thing I have learned about shadows that works at least for me is to wet the paper first where I'm going to apply the shadow color. So that's what I'm doing on the back one there. I started to make the shadow and then forgot to wet it, so I went back and I'm just wetting it with water there. I pulled down the color that was already there, but now I'm adding more. And the reason I do that is it makes the shadow color look a lot softer. You don't want really dark shadows or really harsh colored shadows because it will take over the painting. You don't want them, some paintings do have shadows as the center of interest, but not this one. So I want the shadow to be visible, but I don't want it to overtake the subject of the painting. So now I'm doing the pepper in the front, wetting the surface there where I'm going to put the shadow color. And then apply the shadow right over that color that bled. And it looks like there's reflective color in the shadow when you do that. That's why I like to bleed that color out. And that the shadows help to make the objects sit down in the painting. When you look at paintings online where people will say, "What's wrong with my painting?" If they don't have any shadows, it looks like things are floating in space. So always think about your shadows. But I will tell you, there's one thing I forgot here, and I had finished the video before I realized it. I'm putting the third shadow in now. I forgot to do the shadows for the stems on my peppers. And if you look at my painting up above, you can see that I had put the shadows in that painting. So I will have to go back and do that. And I just wanted to mention that I had forgotten that because the stems make really nice shadows, and I feel bad that I forgot to do that before I finished the video. So there you have it. There, that makes a cute little painting. And the other thing I want to talk about with this painting is look how big the piece of paper is and how relatively small the objects are. Really, what I should have done was to make the objects bigger to take up more of the paper, or add something to it. Add more peppers or lettering or something. And there's two really good places if you wanted to add lettering. Oh, there I'm going back with just a damp brush, my flat brush, to just soften the edges of those shadows once they dry. They have to be dry to do that. But it just, rather than having a real hard line there, it helps to soften up those shadows. So that, again, so they're not so prominent. Anyway, there's a lot of white space on that paper and above on the left side. So you could add lettering if you wanted, like I did in the sample above, and add the word peppers. Now, the other thing I'll say about the painting above that I already did, the word peppers is really small as I look at it now. I could have made that much bigger, and I should have. So think about the size of your paper, how much white space you have, and where you want to put lettering if you want to do the lettering. Um, what I often will do is to do it on a piece of tracing paper, to practice it on a piece of tracing paper, and then you can lay that over and see how would it look if it's at the top, or how would it look if it's at the bottom. So it's up to you, but I would say for a piece of paper like this, make your lettering much bigger to take up more of the space. I'm just going back in, adding more color where I think I need it. I should have noticed that I had forgotten the shadows on the stems, but I just didn't notice it. Too many things to think about when you're doing a video. Just reinforcing that color a little bit. And I will go back and soften the edges of that shadow again once it dries. But wouldn't this make a nice little gift for someone for their kitchen? And it doesn't take long to do. And I really like just painting direct without drawing first and having it go outside the lines. And then you can go back and outline it with paint or with ink. But it gives a nice loose look to the painting or sketch, and that's very attractive to people. People really like that. So now I want to put a finishing touch on this little sketch with some spattering. And I'm going to take three colors, my transparent orange, some cad red light, and some green gold, and get a good amount of water mixed up in each one for the spattering. And then and those are nice complementary colors, so they'll look good together. So then I just pick up one color at a time and start spattering it on the surface. Oh, before I did that though, you might not have seen, I spritzed my paper slightly with my water bottle. Not a lot, but just a little bit. And that helps that color to settle down once I spatter it on the paper. So it's not quite so harsh. And then I just go back and do each of those colors. And if you keep a paper towel handy so that if you get too much on or you get it in a spot where you didn't want it, you can just quickly dab it up. And if you feel the color is too harsh, go back with your spritzer bottle and spritz it a little bit. That'll help it. And that'll give you a cute little painting. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it.